Hey guys, welcome back to the Mind Body broadcast with Austin and Marty, and we are back with segment three. I believe this is segment three of our body part discussion. So far, we've covered pecs and back, which we talked about lats and erectors and rhomboids and teres and all those traps and all this that good stuff. So today we're gonna talk about some deltoid discussion. We'll talk about lateral delts and rear delt or posterior delt, I believe would be the proper term for it. I suppose we could give the anterior delt a little bit of love as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is a good one. I mean, this is one again, like just like the other ones. It kind of depends on. It's a structural thing, I noticed two camps here. It's a lot of people that have kind of that narrower shoulder girdle tend to be more trap dominant, and they have a really hard time with the feeling their delts. Not only the lateral delt, like doing like a side raise or something, but also the rear delt, because those traps are going to be involved in both of those, like fly type of bent over fly or a standing lateral raise. And people can train for years and years and years and just end up developing really good traps and not really, really good shoulders. I know I see it. I've actually had a couple people like that. My brother-in-law's like that. Who I work with, and he's got huge traps and had a hell of a time getting his delts to do anything until we really figured out how to get them to engage, So what are some problems that you typically notice?
Mostly just in flat out and using too much, we'll say liberty with technique. In terms of they were now trying to do presses with too short of a range of motion for their muscle group, or they're doing too wide, or there's flat out will start getting injuries too quickly early on as well, or just things that are setting them up that aren't really for growth, or probably the biggest one out of all of them would be definitely knowing the range of motion, or where the muscles do activate, we'll say, as in, especially if you do kind of a sitting down rear delt fly, people will turn it more into that or lateral fly just due to having the positioning the elbows. So I would say technique is one of the biggest problems I see.
Yeah. So that whole active range of motion.
Yep.
And yeah, I agree. I mean, and that could be on a lot of things. That's especially if going back, if this person is, like a trap dominant type of person, well, especially in like a lateral raise type of motion, you have to work right in just the right range of motion for that side delt or that posterior delt, or you're just going to use your traps.
Exactly.
And then in your pressing, people doing too short of a range of motion, like on the way, like on the concentric portion where they press up, or even like coming down. You don't see this one as much, but sometimes like even coming down too much to where they're almost losing all the tension at the bottom. They're like sitting, I don't even know what you would call it. They're like sitting the weight on their lats almost.
Yes, it's I call it like sitting on like a pocket or on the pocket. It's almost like looks like they're about to do a front squat. They have it so low.
Right, because there's kind of that dead spot there where really all you're doing is you're sitting the weight on the joint, like on the tendons and stuff. It's like in a little bouncy area, which, yeah, you can bounce it, but again, just like anything else, I mean, it's not, this isn't a powerlifting or Olympic lifting or anything where we don't really we're not really we don't really need to use the rebound of the joint.
I found when I was doing, we'll say, the beyond full range of motion standing shoulder press, I get so much tricep activation from it because I was able to have my shoulders be so flexible that my elbows I would have that stop like well below my chin, and then never really felt it in my shoulders fully. And then again, as I said on the chest episode, during bench press, I felt my shoulders during my bench press. So I was all screwed around for a couple of years.
Right. Yeah. Yep. I see, again, this is like, I think, like I said, with the whole shoulder girdle width, the delts are an easy one for me. I was fortunate in that regard. But at the same, in the same token, a lot of people build like good triceps, for example, decent triceps just from like the pressing movements, from secondary work. I have none, zero. I don't feel my triceps in anything. So
I wish, that would be the dream. Yeah.
Now I feel them when I train triceps directly,
Yep.
of course, but I don't have like those, I didn't naturally have like those meaty triceps from doing presses like some people. Now, recently started doing more closer grip pressing for my chest, which I still feel it in my pecs, but it also brings my tricep and saves my shoulder joints a little bit. But yeah, again, I think the biggest thing really is just what I see we'll start with the side delt, because that's probably the most vanity part of the shoulder that we're seeing from the rear. It gives us the width. Is keeping that shoulder girdle planted down, and not shrugging it up, not shrugging up with the traps. That's the biggest thing. I've gone as far, I've literally taken bands and wrap one around each foot and over the shoulder like suspenders.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And just to give that cue so they know what it feels like. So once you raise up, you can feel it. Cause once you get your arm up to about a 90 with your body, where the armpit is with the body, that's it. You start going much higher, you're going to squeeze your traps a lot. So at the same token, you don't have to go super low either. But again, keeping that shoulder girdle completely planted down is going to be the biggest thing in hitting the side delts. And there's a lot of things you can do. You can kind of manipulate that range of motion until you get used to it. Because like any of the other muscles, I think the first thing is like once you can feel them pretty good, then you can start doing more with it. So you could even start with something like a partial lateral raise. Like I know you've seen, I think like John Meadows used to put those in his programs a lot, like the locked arm little partial raises with a heavier weight.
Yep.
They work good. Now it's not going to work your medial delt exactly the same, but at the same time, it's a great way to feel it, at least. You can, again, and that heavier weight also keeps your shoulder girdles planted down, literally just hanging there with a straight arm, and you're basically just coming up maybe a third of the way, if that. And what that will do is it does not allow you to pull your traps into the movement because you're not raising your arm high enough to do so. So stuff like that can definitely help, at least until you learn the activation cues. That's probably, but again, the whole shoulder girdle staying planted, that has to be easily the biggest issue that I see with people, and them not being able to feel their side delt. Now there's another one, which I'm sure you're going to touch on too, about like elbow position and hand position, like not bringing your hand above your elbow type of thing. So what's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, exactly. I find that if you're, it almost, I think I called it like the chicken wing or something like this. When you'll see the fly down where the elbows are bent pretty aggressively, which I don't really have too much of a problem with how much elbow hinge you have, but as soon as the hands come above the elbow and you start almost doing like a weird form of reverse curl with the dumbbell, I think I know what you mean when I talk about when you see this. So where the elbows come up, the elbows stop, and then the hands keep going and turn into like a reverse curl. It's just looking at what are you moving now? What are you still trying to activate? You can't activate the medial delt going that far with that range of motion. Anything that can hinder you to get it catched or caught back onto the medial delt during the eccentric part of the movement again. So, but yeah, if you're having your hands or the angle of your elbow to where your elbow meets your hand, and you kind of have your hand bent a little bit, or your elbow, bent a little bit too far out in front of you, and you do that lift, you're now going to be effectively turning anything that was working your predominantly medial delt into your anterior delt, your front delt. And so then as you can watch too, some people, as their sets go longer and get more tired and get more weight, they start having the angle in the the elbow there shorten. They're now like they're almost having their hands face forward a heck of a lot more, so their hands aren't even out to the side. So yeah, that's another, because of, just like we've talked about, and I think every single one of these so far, that the stronger muscles will take over if you don't really fight through that technique and want to.
Yeah, right. That's a good point. So I wasn't even alluding to the whole elbow forward thing too, but yeah, that's another one, because you get like it's like a Y raise.
There you go, a Y raise. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a real thing. Like those are something I do sometimes, but but yeah, you do notice that, and they'll get like the forward lean so they can kind of pop it with their hips.
Yep.
Like throwing the weight up, which one way that I like to prevent that is I'll often program in seated, like a seated lateral, where the cue on that is keep your back against the seat, like the upright, And hey, if you really have a problem, don't even fully incline it. You could even take it back one click to where it's like not fully vertical. It's got like, it's leaning just slightly, like you would use for like a bicep curl, like a reclining curl. Mm-hmm. You could just lean the seat slightly so you're back just a little bit. And what that'll do is it kind of makes your arms hang, behind you just a tad. Mm-hmm. And that'll completely take, you could swing to the front still, but it would be like literally the most inefficient way to do it. So you're basically going to raise it up to the side if you're leaning back slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. Yeah. That's the elbow. You know what though? I think another little thing worth mentioning there is a lot of people say like lead with the pinky. They use that, kind of turn their hand downward or turn their thumb downward as a way to use that elbow cue to keep your elbow up. That works. I personally don't do that. That doesn't feel as good to me. I don't know if it's just the way that I'm built or what, but I actually keep my hand pretty flat, and sometimes I'll even rotate my thumb up slightly. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, I'm still not curling. I'm not like doing the bicep curl at the top where I'm bending my arm. I'm still raised. I'm keeping my elbow and my hand pretty well level. So you don't necessarily have to do the whole like turn the pinky up thing. The idea is just to make sure that you are leading with the elbow more so than the hand. I guess would be the point there. Yes. For sure.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I always like to think of it there. If I had strings that were attached to my elbows, that's what would be pulling up first, as opposed to like the hand is just kind of there. It's just kind of the attachment where the dumbbell is.
That's why things like a side lateral raise machine can work so good.
Absolutely. Yep.
But you know what though? I see it on the machine all the time that people still shrug their traps.
Uh-huh. Yep.
So they'll do it. It takes the lower part of the limb out of it from the elbow to the hand, which is great. But they're still like shrugging their traps upward, because I think it's even easier to mess that part up with the machine than it is with the dumbbell. Just because it feels really good to kind of shrug up as you fling your elbows up, right? Because you can huck a bunch more weight. So again, you still have to keep your shoulder girdle planted down. What about pressing movements though? Because we talked about, you mentioned the range of motion a little bit, but what about different variations of pressing movements? Because there's a bunch. You could do like little things like the width of your grip, mm-hmm. For in front versus behind the head. So there's all kinds of little things there. Sitting on the machine backwards.
Yep, sitting on the machine backwards. But some of that the times they're how, in my opinion, the machine should have been built. It's been biomechanically or somehow structurally built poorly, that now doing it from backwards is gonna feel better than doing it from the correct way, we'll say. I know there was I called it the behind the neck press, and I remember being able to get into a much better position that was safer because it almost felt like I was trying to shove my hands too far behind my neck when I was doing this machine. I think it was a hammer. I'm pretty sure it was hammer strength that made it. But yeah, just kind of sitting into it felt a heck of a lot better. But I know that anything that you, if you're having like a neutral grip or a hammer grip, that is definitely going to be working my front of my delts, my anterior delts more, especially. So if that's a way to kind of do a power version of that, if you don't get enough from your presses on chest and front raises, if you use those. But yeah, I find that it's still good to go to where you still feel the muscle kind of stretch or relax the most. Because I know for a fact that if I go too low doing any kind of the wider grip or let's say the same width as a lat pull down, if I come down too far, I will then transfer all of the feeling onto more of a front delt than I will be able to feel in a side delt. So that's definitely something for me. What have you noticed for either yourself or others?
Yeah, same thing. I even write it into the program. Sometimes I'll write machine overhead press, but I'll say face the direction that feels the best or something, along those lines, because yes. I literally do think it kind of just depends on the person and the machine. I do all right either way. I think the biggest thing is some of the machines that have your hands too far, really what you should have is externally rotated. So your hand, your arm, like from the elbow up to the hand, that part is right beside your head in terms of it shouldn't be way out in front of your head or way behind your head. It should be, for the most part, probably just makes a straight line across. Mm-hmm. And that's going to keep that whole delt capsule there, I guess you could call it, kind of pressed backward and nice and engaged while you press up and down. And you could go as far as to go behind your head. I know some people, they give it that exercise kind of a bad rap. I don't think it's really a bad exercise for the right person.
Yes.
I think it works really well for some people. Like personally, one of the things that I found, and again, this literally might just be the way I'm built, but I like a wider grip I really like wide behind the neck presses.
Usually with the barbell?
Yeah, they feel really. Now I can go as wide as my wrists will support. Right. You know what I mean? My wrists aren't some weird position, but because it does two things. For one, when I go wider, it's literally keeping that range of motion just in my active range of motion with my delt. I can't really push with my tricep at all. And then secondly, it's keeping behind the head is keeping my shoulder basically engaged the whole time because it's pinched, it's like pinched backwards.
Okay. Yeah.
And another version of that would be like the over and back press. Some people will do it that way where they'll press forward, then go right over the top of their head to the back, to the front, to the back, to the front.
You know what? I haven't done those in years, and I used to love that. Thought it kind of gave it a different groove and different feeling. Yep.
Dude, those are awesome. Now that's one where I kind of like to use it as like a long tension exercise.
Yes, I don't really for sure.
One. Yeah, that's one where you can just really blow the delt up, kind of pop it forward, pop it back. You got to be careful. You got to be careful though. As you get fatigued, you'll scalp yourself.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
Yeah, you get a little greedy on the weight on that one, and you'll end up scalping yourself.
And your ego.
Yeah. I did that a couple times. I remember pushing those pretty hard into like the fatigue threshold where I'd come back behind my head and my depth perception was a little off, and I'd like shave the hair off the back of my head, and I'm like, oh, that's it. Set's over.
Yep, definitely. Yep.
But I personally, like I said, I don't think that the behind the neck press is a bad thing for the right person. If it feels good and it doesn't impinge anything inside the joint, do it. I really think that's going to be probably the takeaway with most exercises. If it feels good, then it probably is going to work.
Yeah.
for you. Um, but do you have any experience with, I don't even know what you would call it. I call them like a rack press or a cage press. So something like you can do them seated or standing where you're literally doing it from like a dead stop at like nose level or forehead level and pressing up.
Yep, sure have.
Yeah, is that something you like? Because
You know what, I really do, especially if you kind of if I lean into it ever so bit, and I push up and I kind of push my head in between it, almost like an Olympic lift would do. Like I just it just hits it hits my side delts like no other business. So yeah, I do love those a lot.
Yeah, I do those quite a bit. I like that too because you can limit that bottom range of motion where you'll take the tension. Yeah. You can basically just set the power rack right where it feels, right in that perfect spot. And you can get a really nice concentric drive and squeeze those delts. You really, too, you kind of want to like you said, kind of lean your neck forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Where your head's going between your arms. But yeah, that's another one. That's another one that I like in terms of overhead pressing. And I think that actually is a little bit quote unquote safer for the joints versus like bouncing a dumbbell down out of the bottom and where it gets kind of wobbly.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one too. Definitely.
Yeah. Yep. But yeah, so that side, I mean, that pretty much covers the lateral delt for the most part. A lot of the little cues there. Rear delts though, man, that was a big one. And I know a lot of people didn't like it kills me. So it kills me when I go like, I'll see a good physique and they turn to the side or they do like a side chest or something and they're just completely flat.
And they have no rear delt. Yep.
And it really just kills the look of that.
It almost looks like they're hunching in the pose. You know what I mean? Yep.
It really kills the look of the shoulder. And rear delts, same thing, like we mentioned. It's just if you are someone that's trap dominant or has a narrow shoulder girdle, it's going to be difficult to feel your rear delts. You're going to have to get creative with it to figure it out.
Yep.
But number one thing that I found, because I mentioned keeping your shoulder girdle down. Well, for rear delt, the number one thing I found is keeping your scapulas completely folded forward and relaxed. Like, you could use a reverse pec deck. That's an easy example. So when you're on a reverse pec deck and you have your chest on the pad, I literally like to sit a little high on the pad to where my shoulder, I'm literally hunched forward like I have terrible posture. And I'm leaning over the pad because now when I bring my arm back, my traps are completely opened up. My rhomboids are completely opened up. My teres are completely opened up. I look like I'm doing like a front or like a rear lat spread.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Like completely bent forward. And that way, when I come back, literally the only muscle that can engage is my rear delt, maybe my tricep a little bit, but, that's the biggest cue. And you can do that, replicate that however you want. I mean, a guy I was training with yesterday came out and trained. He does his with standing. He does his standing with his forehead on a bench in front of him where he can just literally let his arms dangle all the way down to where his back's completely hunched over. He literally looks like he's a terrible posture and he's just hunching.
And he feels it perfectly.
Yep. And then raise the arm to the side. Yep. Usually with the raise, like a very, very slight bend in the elbow.
Right.
Just a little bit.
Yep, just enough.
Yep. Bring it up. And you'll know it when you feel it. But yeah, like I said, that whole keeping the scapulas open and not retracting backwards is going to be, that's one of them. And then there is a version where you can pinch your scapulas, which I literally just learned about probably last year, which we could talk about too. But, anything? What are your cues on that one to feel the rear delts?
Right. Well, outside of physically having someone in person there to kind of jab you in the rear delts, like we were talking about the previous ones, to say like these are them. Can you feel it there? It is pretty much exactly that. Or even I will kind of put my hands on the scapula and kind of push them forward, or like push them in. We'll say to the lat spread pose, and then have say like don't let them leave them here, or even say shorten your range of motion. Don't come back as far as possible, because as soon as you go, I think past a certain point, then of course the rhomboid and trap is going to take over. And then also too trying to keep it so they don't come all the way down and lose tension, of course. So just even kind of doing like a hovering motion in between a certain shorter range of motion, and that usually will is be able to make clients kind of grab a hold of the concept.
Yeah, I like that for sure. Okay. So you like are you kind of a fan of the hang and swing type?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially then kind of finding for the hang and swing, like being face down on the bench, and then either having it this high, or whatever high, and then just finding that width and finding which grip protonated. Usually more protonated I find works better instead of more of a neutral grip, and just finding them, having them go and keep that until they're so on fire that they're never going to forget where the rear delts are anymore.
Well, that's just it. Like I said, once you can feel them one or two good times in a session, you'll have that cue down. You'll be a lot better at it. I even set a guy up one time on this guy I used to train with. We set it up like a seal row, like, you're laying face down on a bench where you're elevated off the ground.
Yep.
Literally just so he couldn't touch the ground at all, and hung heavy ass dumbbells from his hand with straps, like Versa grips.
Okay.
And I said, okay, now you can't pinch your traps back at all. So just swing those little dumbbells out to the side about 4 to 6 inches, and it just lit him up, just because that's all he could move him. But of course it was completely rear delt because he was all stretched out. So yeah, I mean, get creative with it. But the other version that it makes sense. It makes sense to me. It's not something I would have thought to do, but it does make sense after I saw it. Is you could do, whether it's chest supported or however you want to do it, is actually pinch your scapula and your traps and everything back completely, so they're completely contracted. You don't have to like squeeze them super hard.
Right.
Now this would require a lot lighter weight. So if I normally use a 30-pound dumbbell, then I would probably only use like 15 on these.
Okay.
And pinch all the way back. And then what that does is it just basically makes it to where you're just moving the arm, because now you're already, everything's like glued back. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out how to explain it, because it feels good. Now your traps and everything, they're going to get some involvement, right? Because they're in an isometric contraction basically. But, if I squeeze everything back like that, now all I can do is move my arm, my shoulder joint.
Right.
Nothing. I can't pinch my back at all. So that's another cool one that you could do. But again, it's going to require a lot lighter weight. Like I'm talking maybe even as light as like 5-10 pounds for those.
Very humbling, those kinds of exercises, though.
Yes, very much so. I don't know where I learned that. I can't remember. That might have been a Dr. Serrano special or something.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds like one.
Yeah. He always has me do funky shit in his office that makes me really weak.
I think I've seen a couple of those videos from years ago, and he's like doing something. You're like, you're trying so hard, right? It's just
perfect example, since we're talking about shoulders, have you ever done a Serrano press?
No.
Have you ever seen them done?
I'm trying to think if I know which one that is, Austin.
Well, there's a couple variations of the ways that you can do it, but typically it's like take an incline bench, like you would do a bench, like an incline dumbbell press on, but lay face down. And you're pressing outwards. So your arms, you see your arms are like hanging out over top. Okay. And the whole goal is that you have to keep your arm externally rotated the whole entire time, and you can't let it drop down.
Oh my God.
It's extremely difficult. We're talking like 5. If you're really, really strong and you have good external rotation, you might be able to do 10 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very demoralizing.
Yep.
That's a good version. If anyone's curious to check out Serrano presses, they're really good for. I do like a banded version too, standing, but you can Google, you can punch it in YouTube and you'll see it. It's really good for people that have poor external rotation of their shoulders. So like they can't, if they have their arm or they have their hand out in front of them, they can't get their hand up above their head all the way.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like they can't. So that's really good for those type of people if they have that kind of issue, and you almost can't hurt your joint at all with 5 or 10 pounds. You know, so I mean, if you have poor shoulder health, it's a good one. Using the lately added in some of the band bell.
Yes, I saw that. Yes, you have been.
Yeah, so I haven't done it for shoulders yet, but I've been having my wife do them for shoulders because she has some shoulder issues.
Okay.
So to help rebuild that joint, and it really helps stabilize. You know, you're going to activate every single fiber around that whole entire area because the damn thing shakes like crazy.
Yeah, it is oscillating the whole time, isn't it?
Oh yeah, have you ever used one?
No, I've never used one personally yet. No.
I don't know if they. It's an American-made thing. Like I'm sure somebody in Canada has one.
Right.
But it's brutal. Yeah, it literally, like when I do it we'll do it for chest, like a bench press. My entire pec from inside insertion to outside, up by my collarbone, down by my ribs. I mean, it is just destroyed.
Wow.
And it feels fantastic on your joints. It doesn't bother my joints at all. But yeah, they call it kinetic. So it's kinetic training. So it's basically just like transferring that energy back and forth everywhere. Yeah, brutal stuff. But man, there's all kinds of stuff you can do for shoulders. I don't know. One little one we didn't touch on is, I don't know if you're a fan of like upright rows at all. I have kind of mixed feelings on those.
You know what? I like more of a cable upright row when I'm strapped up with something like a Versa grip than I am of just an upright row with like a barbell. And if I lean back against the cable, like it feels just better to me. So, and then sometimes I like wider ones for I feel they can hit my rear delts a little bit.
Yeah. I've done that with a rope where lean back a little bit and I pull the rope up in an upright row, then I kind of pull my elbows back behind me as I pull upward. So you can hit the side and the rear delt that way. But yeah, if I do an upright row, I'll either do it with cables or I actually like doing it with dumbbells too. Just because I just feel like the barbell in the upright row, just unless you have the structure, it can easily impinge the joint in a funky way. Cause I mean, there's really only the barbells, it's straight, it doesn't move at all. So, I mean, if it doesn't suit you well, you're pretty much SOL. You can't really, it's either going to hurt your shoulders or just you're not going to feel it, or you do it with all your traps or whatever. Mm-hmm. For some people, it's awesome. They can feel it, but I kind of like the dumbbell because it allows you to vary your, how wide, where you pull it to, how you pull it, all that good stuff. So yeah, if I do it, it's probably going to be with a dumbbell more than anything. Yeah, so there's a lot of cool little exercises. I mean, I'll do some different stuff like single arm. Yes. I've done some single presses and things like that. But, you can do, the thing about any of that stuff is until really activation is key. Once you've got activation, you can get fancy. You can literally do anything to be able to feel it.
If that can be the one thing that I would say to either younger me or anyone that's listening to this or just has not been able to really feel the muscle, is play around with a whole bunch of the finesse exercises, or I would call them activation exercises too, and find one that you feel it and start hammering it and until you get that feeling. And then, because it is, it's if you're not feeling it, you're probably not training it. It's just the way that's going to be a great general rule here, and just wasting your time on training, we'll say, traps and rhomboids when now you've got no rear delts and wonder why. Well, here are hopefully a lot of things that you can sub out to try.
Yeah, exactly. So get your activation down, and you can play with it. But yeah, sweet. Front delt,
Front delt.
anterior.
You just started.
Delt.
You just started doing them this year, right? Directly.
Yeah, I didn't. I don't think like we talked about. I don't think a lot of people really train their anterior delt directly because they just really don't need to.
Yes.
It just gets your anterior gets so much indirect work. I mean, it gets indirect work on all your pressing. It gets indirect work on your overhead pressing. It gets indirect even on like bicep curls. Like a lot of people will they might use their anterior delts a little bit as they curl that weight up. But the reason I started doing it is just because if you are a bodybuilder and you're purely training for cosmetic, or symmetry or whatever, or aesthetics, I guess it would be called. The way that your delt looks in the rear double bicep pose,
right,
is a lot of that is dictated by your front delt. Because when you cock your arm back in that external rotation, you hit your bicep pose, that whole roundness of your delt as it sticks up, that's mostly anterior delt from the front.
Yes.
You could honestly, like, you're going to see your medial delt in there too, like the thickness of it, but you could have a really good medial delt there that's real meaty. But if you have a really shallow front delt, your delts aren't going to look good in that back, in that rear double bicep pose.
Yep,
so
you're just not going to get that mini mountain look, right? It's just going to go away. Yep.
Yeah. That's kind of where I was at, and it's not too bad, but it's like, I feel like my medial delts really is pretty good. And then I was getting frustrated because I'm like, why does my delt not look like it? Why does it not look as good in that rear double bicep pose as it does like a muscular or something? I'm like, well, that's because my anterior delt's not very good. So
self-realization.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good. You got to be honest with yourself.
Yep.
But yeah, anterior delt training. I don't think that's pretty easy, really. I think for the most part.
I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be pretty much similar to your side delt training. A couple little cues to remember is, I personally will like to use, if I'm doing a front raise, I personally like to use either, I guess it would be a pronated grip where my palm's facing down, or you can do a hammer grip.
Yeah.
Where it's neutral. There are some people that do like the supinated front raises.
Yeah.
Which, if you feel it, that's great. I personally, that's not my favorite.
I get almost a little bit of tension on my biceps in the wrong way that I don't like, so I stay away from that.
Yeah, I just don't. I can do it, but if I have to literally use like hardly any weight at all, really focus on it. Otherwise, my bicep gets tired.
Yeah.
So
exactly. That's more for me. I don't really feel it, but my bicep just gets tired. Exactly.
Right. So personally, I like a hammer grip, the neutral grip, or a pronated grip, and you can do your front raises, and you can do them a million ways. I mean, you can do them standing. If you have a tendency to maybe swing too much, you could even do them chest supported, at like a slight incline and raise. I do like that variation. I do that with a lot of people. I'll do like a
me too. Yep.
Yeah, like a chest supported front raise, or you can do, or that's where that Y raise comes in. I do a chest supported Y raise where they're raising,
sure. Yeah,
like a 45-degree angle. You know what I mean? So they looks like a Y. Banded, another one. I'll literally just stand. I do Y raises with bands a lot, where I'll just stand in the band and I'll do a Y raise all the way up over my head. Those are really tough.
Yeah, if the band gets up that high. Yeah.
Oh yeah, those are really tough. But yeah, again, I mean, front delts not overly complicated. I think just figuring out the grip that works for you, and probably also kind of figuring out like what kind of tempo and momentum works for you. Like, hey, some people get good front delts with the heavy ass like hammer raises, like Branch Ward style,
exactly,
like 80. Yeah, you know what? If you can feel it, like I can feel those just fine, but I also have good mind muscle connection or whatever, so if you're just starting off, that's probably not your best bet.
Yeah.
What's your take on the front delts?
Pretty much exactly everything that you just said that I kind of added into is exactly that. I wouldn't. It does get a lot of beating from almost every press as well. So adding in, like, if you were to have 2 direct anterior delt exercises in every delt workout, I think that's almost too much. I think I'd just be getting hit too hard from too many angles. So yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, right now, what did I add in? I think three sets a week. I just literally added
there
like
you go.
3.
Perfect. That's perfect to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I just added 3 sets to my my regular delt training, and essentially just to get them really pumped, break the tissue down a little bit so I can get some muscle repair and grow them a little bit. But
right.
But that's a little muscle.
It really, if you take your hand and if you put it on the opposite front delt, it really is little. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's tiny. It's like a little strip down the front. Plus, again, you're not really going to you don't necessarily want it to be overpowering because you don't want it to affect your chest pressing.
Correct. Yep.
And all. But I do think it looks cool though too. Like I kind of admire like the guys that they can hit like that hands clasp, most muscular, and the front delts really meaty too.
Just beefs it out of the front of the chest. Yeah.
It looks cool. I've seen a few guys, like one of my clients, he's got that. His pecs are super thick, and literally like the front delt tie-in is like one thing. There's there's no separation. No. Like that looks badass.
That just looks bad. I think one of the guys I know that's got it the most is David Henry. On one side, just has it just explodes out of his chest. It just looks amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, that's because for a while there, the rear delt was kind of the underrated muscle. Like everyone started talking about, got to get your rear delts up. You got to get that 3D look. So maybe we can make front delts cool again.
Yeah. They were going to get some hats. Make front delts cool again. Yeah. Great again. Yeah.
Make front delts great again.
There we go.
But yeah, cool. I mean, I know there's all kinds of little fancy exercises you can do, but I like your 6-way raises and all kinds of shit. But I mean,
6 ways. Yep. You give those a Google, boys and girls, and let us know how much you hate us after you find that.
Another demoralizing one. But
yeah, no,
I think really
go ahead.
But really more of the point of our podcast here is more of the activation bit, like how you can optimally feel the muscle working, because you can, like I said, once you get to that point, you can really do anything.
Yeah, exactly. The rest just comes after from there. I agree. Yeah,
for sure. Would there be any absolutely front or absolutely delt do nots that you would throw in there? Or not really cover that? I think
well, for the most I would say direct heavy rotator cuff training. I would say that should be very watched. I know I've seen some pretty respectful people say to do it, and I've also seen some pretty respectful people say to not do it. Like as in like do cable, we'll say it external rotator work or cable internal. Yep. And sometimes I've seen it work, but you got to be very careful if you're going to do the technique on that stuff. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do arm circles to warm up. I do or things like that. That's non-heavy or non-directly heavy weights to warm up. So I think just the over cautionary about the rotator cuff in the wrong way should be something that should be watched. How about yourself?
Yeah, I agree. I think I do cringe a little bit at some of those warm ups, but because again, like I said, unless it's an issue of poor mobility in the joint, normally like poor mobility in the joint, or flexibility in the joint is because there's like muscle tightness somewhere else, unless you have like a direct shoulder injury, it's normally because your front delt's really tight or something, and it's pulling you down, or your pec's tight or something. But a lot of people, they have shoulder pain, and it's normally because they've been doing something wrong, or they have muscle tightness somewhere. So I don't think that the warm-ups that they do really are made for their issue. Does that make sense? Like,
no, yes. Or if anything, it could be counterproductive to what they're trying to do. Yep.
Right. Yeah, I like you mentioned arm circles, though. Man, if anyone wants a fun little finisher and they really want to just blow their delts up, have a good little delt workout, and then literally do arm circles forward and back till you can't hold the dumbbells up anymore.
Isn't that fun? Yeah.
Or just do it with your, like, I've literally done a drop set where I'll do like a 10, a 5, and then I just do my arms.
Yep. Yep.
And yeah, lots of little things. Delts don't take a tremendous amount of weight. You can overload through your pressing and stuff, but I think I've found with some of those fibers, like it's one of those areas where whatever fiber type, it just tends to respond to like a lot of density of training, like a little bit higher reps. There's might be some science behind that. I don't know, but that's just kind of anecdotal.
Yeah. Cool, man.
Right on. That's it.
I think we nailed it big time there.
All right. Next time we'll break down another muscle group. We decided we have about 4 more of these left, so we're going to try to hit all the major areas for you guys, and hopefully you will be activation specialists.
Activation specialists. Yep, that's right. Okay, from Austin and Marty here at the My Mighty Body broadcast. We'll catch you next time.